release of Jurassic World Rebirth, it's time to rank all 5 Gareth Edwards movies from my least favorite to my favorite. Hello and welcome to Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below how you would rank all 5 Gareth Edwards directed films from your least favorite to your favorite. Let's create a nice, respectful environment discussing all of his films as a whole for the sci-fi franchises and originals that he has produced just as well. Taking in last place, we got Jurassic World Rebirth. Unfortunately, it falls flat on its face. If you were to look at it by its basic standards, it is relatively good for a dinosaur movie going in for all of those niches that you're going in for, but looking at it as a Jurassic World film, if you are going up to someone that had never seen any of the Jurassic Park movies, tell them to describe what that sort of movie might look like, this feels like it has all those basic values that that person would explain, just going about with all these different weird shenanigans, introducing some clone dinosaurs that are interbred and just doesn't have the interesting appeal that you would expect that sort of idea to have. It has all the general tropes you expect from the dinosaurs and Jurassic Park franchise. All these new characters, Jonathan Bailey, Scarlett Johansson, are good in their roles, and we're getting some good side roles just as well, but they're all playing their part in a way that doesn't feel as fun, as exciting. There's no sense of wonder or spectacle to the whole thing, except in this one little scene where you get the nod to the Jurassic Park theme that really leads on with a weird sense of just getting caught up in the moment, but then being taken right out of that. And there's not really any horror aspects to the whole dinosaur chase sequences either, despite the trailers building it up to be something bigger and grander. Some of those same exact scenes can pale in comparison in context to where the scene is all leading on. Even the Jurassic Park dinosaur chasing them through the river in the canal, it just doesn't feel as quick as you would want it to, for how slow the dinosaur moves about, for how easy they can get about to escape. And there's a contrived human motivation within the human villain that he has this trope that we've seen before in others, but done much better. And the way he's set up to be a villain is very cheap and undesired for the natural state of what you're getting. It's right after they rescue this Hispanic family, and the Hispanic family kind of gets in the way of all the work. They get out of line from where they should be within the state of the mission that is actually going on, people really doing their jobs. So there's so many flaws in the way it forces out the villain, brings about all these different things that flow about in a basic standard of what you expect, but also a subplot that is very unneeded for the whole stakes of where this is headed as a whole. You almost forget what this film was meant to be targeting in the first place, where the journey was all headed on. So ultimately, it feels so forgettable already for the stakes that it has a very basic premise to begin with. And going number 4, we have Monsters. Now, this is a general premise pandemic movie where you get this tourist that's being led on by this journalist through this pandemic thing. They're suspecting alien life that's all going on, and there's this quarantine area that they crash land into, have to get through, and it has all the basic standards to what you expect out of it. It's entertaining and goes about within the standards you expect out of it, and it's relatively small budget, but you don't expect any of these big things, these big spectacles or big set designs and everything you're leading on, because it's going on through a jungle. So it has some of the basic scares. The CGI looks relatively great for where you're taking on this film for be. The monsters can have some great scenes, especially building up to that last final battle sequence of sorts that really builds on to something that has the great stakes that this film holds, some fear factors that is missing from other films that are similar to this. So it's a pandemic film that, even though it's relatively basic for its means, it almost feels like it doesn't necessarily need to go straight to theaters. It's still one that holds the stamina that, especially for this being Gareth Edwards' directorial debut, you get all the standards for, given that he wasn't recognized so well as a director to get the budget he would need for something much bigger, it's quite good for this relatively small budget film that contains itself in its own nature. You can follow along the characters and have a good enough time, especially at a quick 90 minutes. And next up we have Godzilla, a franchise that he was leading on into the startup to the MonsterVerse that relatively sets up the standards of what a good Godzilla film can look like. Now, there's some aspects of the story that can lead into the human side of the story a bit too much, not necessarily being on track with where we're headed with the Godzilla surfacing up as a whole. There's certain aspects to that that can look really dark once you go to the final battle, that ultimately it's interesting because they build him up to be this big monstrous thing, and everything that leads onto it can be good, but it also sort of hides itself within this dark environment in the end, not necessarily always being really cool and really impressive, but at the same time the CGI is still great. It does tackle some of the good mannerisms to what it's doing with its characters, might be the best characters we got from the MonsterVerse thus yet, but at the same time there's a standard to where we're headed with the story that I hope for a little bit more action, that the story itself doesn't necessarily gravitate to me all the way through. I love the sci-fi aspect of it, the monstrous effects that we're building up to, and how we're building and combining the characters and what the viewpoint of Godzilla is. It just definitely brings out some interesting ideas that plays into effect from the back and forth, whether he's a good guy, whether he's a bad guy, and how he can all benefit the society as a whole, and what they have to do to get rid of him. So it ultimately comes out to be an interesting start to the MonsterVerse that I find Gareth Edwards pulls off fairly effectively for just doing and tackling this franchise for where we're headed with it going forward, that just ultimately brings about some interesting tropes to where we're headed with this franchise. And for my runner-up, we have Rogue One, a Star Wars story, the prequel to Star Wars A New Hope that really builds up these characters in a quick and organized fashion, really dissecting and really building up the world to Star Wars as a whole, creating some great dissection. And director Krennic is one of my favorite Star Wars characters that we've gotten out of the Disney era, that really builds up what Ben Mendelsohn's role is out of this. But we also get Cassian Andor, Jyn Erso, and all these other lovely and fun characters that just do a lot to the sacrifices and stakes that are all held within this franchise. And while you know what the setup is all leading on to, you know the fates of all these characters that you've never seen before in the future of the Star Wars franchise, it's ultimately something that builds up these characters to have some love interest, to have some different sacrificial moments, that really builds up the sufficient needs that this film has to really grab onto you from the get-go, create a world that feels surreal, has all the beach wars and all of these planetary defenses, that creates all the differences between where we're going forward. And while all these different things are set up with a means to an end that we're already familiar with, it ultimately still pays in a great effect with the cinematography, with the world building, with all the deep nuances to each of the characters that they build up as a whole, creating some great messages with hope and sacrifice, and what all it means to really build upon between family, between everything that's going about, sacrificing for the sake of the empire that's now starting to take over. And Darth Vader just has a great cameo scene throughout the hallway sequence that just is terrifying as ever, and just seeing the planetary destruction from the Death Star, everything that's all leading on as a whole. You just see the surface of suffering that is all leading on, that builds upon these great stakes for the interesting character tropes that we're all leading on for, where Star Wars is headed going forward. And that takes me into my number one Gareth Edwards movie. We got The Creator, a sci-fi movie at its finest. It's deep, it's slow, it's melancholic in the way it's building upon the surface of this film. It has these three different sections to the story that balances in a great, interesting arc for this one character named Joshua, leading on through all these different challenges and navigation, trying to lead this baby through finding its place, finding what's all going on, a few twists and turns here and there, but ultimately the cinematography draws me in, and even though its character work is not as fine as what we get from Star Wars Rogue One, there's something that really pulls me in, especially for the artwork, the cinematography, that just draws in Gareth Edwards' best work. Feels like a magnus opus of sorts for the treatment he does with this film, the artwork of the skyline, of everything that's all going on, the different wars, and throughout the prologue, the different betrayals, and everything you're getting within the metaphorical nature of this story, what you're pulling in with these characters and how they integrate within each other, just pulls about something grand and spectacle. And the grand means that this film is ultimately going off of, creating some great themes that really pulls upon the heartstrings of the emotions. Everything that's going on throughout just goes about in such an interesting and compelling manner, but that still leads on to great camera work and everything that's going on in a smooth and free-flowing motion to what they do with the editing. But of course, Gareth Edwards' directing is certainly at one of his best work here, doing some great work with just the visual aspect as a whole, making a sci-fi fan just so satisfied with the nature of what it's pulling off. Yes, it may be slow, but that's also well deserving when it can be treated this well in the standards you're building upon, the characters, the cinematography, everything that builds upon the stakes of this film, just all delivers as a whole. So that's just my personal thoughts on all 5 Gareth Edwards movies, from my least favorite to my favorite. Let me know in the comments below how you would rank his filmography. It's just as well. Let's create a nice discussion. What you think of his director, if he good, or do you just not connect to his work quite as well? Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already, to join in Film Culture community, where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.